So today, the coming economic meltdown, and fairly useful thing to discuss about, especially with, I'm sure many have heard some of the newest announcements from different governments and things that are going on right now in Australia especially. So it's a very good lead up into where I see some of this going and why protecting your wealth and protecting your future. Let's just say that it's fair to say that this is a time to be taking a lot of action. And I'm sure you would all be agreeing. Who, by the way, is just if you're booked to come to our event on Saturday, our one-day event, asset protection, just type a Y. If not, just type an N, just so I can get some idea who's coming, who's not. Because obviously I'll be covering quite a bit of this on that, and some of it not so much. But okay, most people it seems are. Okay, so most are. There's a maybe. Must be a few no's somewhere, no doubt. But anyway, oh yeah, there's a couple of no's. So, okay, good. Gives me a bit of an idea. Okay, so as I said, I'm not a licensed lawyer, not a licensed financial advisor. So this is not really basically any advice for your own circumstances. You just have to educate this and make your own decisions. So it's going to go for 60 minutes, and then I'll take some questions, and it should be finished within about 65, 70 minutes, all things equal. Hopefully, possibly even before 60 minutes. The big one here, as you notice, is point 3. Type comments in the text chat and questions in the Q&A. It's so much easier for me to get to them. So generally, I can't guarantee you, but your question will be answered if it's in the comments or whatever. But if you put it in the questions, I'll make my absolute utmost attempt to answer it for you. So a recording available. Okay, so most of you know me by now. That's just a bit about me. That's my experience. I've been doing wealth protection and predicting this kind of stuff coming for years. And I will say this, it's all very well to be a really good futurist prediction, which I have been able to do for whatever reason successfully economically. It's a whole different surreal experience to be living it in real life right now. A lot of the stuff I saw was happening, and in a way, you kind of hope that you're wrong. So, and it looks like it's happening, and it looks like there's more to come yet. So I'm really, really glad that most people here, my feeling would be preaching to the converted, and know that right now is a time of pretty great peril to economic rights, to health rights, to everything. So let's just get underway. Certainly right now, we've got all kinds of coercion and threats, and what I will admit has genuinely surprised me is how many mandates are going on. I expected them to give mandates for various things on government premises and flights and all that. I'm very surprised that businesses aren't being given the choice in some places. That part I'm a bit surprised about. So that's making life very interesting, and certainly a big pushback is my prediction will probably start happening a little bit more on this. So in the meantime, as well as pushing back, getting yourself protected is what this is all about today, and protecting your wealth and taking your insurance or preventative action. So we're seeing all kinds of stuff going on here right now. Northern Territory in West Australia, of course, Northern Territory have already said some stuff, but the Chief Health Minister admitted today there's all kinds of pushback happening in the Northern Territory about their tough mandates. WA, of course, as usual, have tried to supersede everyone else and make this tougher and more expensive. So interesting. And a sovereign individual predicted all this kind of stuff would be happening for those of you who've seen it. Out of interest, who's read this book or in the process of reading it right now? Just type yes if you have read this, or right now you are in the process of reading it, just so I can get a little bit of an idea. Okay, Jack's almost halfway. That's great. Yep, quite a few people. Philip, it's a hard read. It's a very hard read. Yes, I agree. It's a tough read. And it's hard to follow. I would agree too, Amber. So it's not the easiest book to follow or read, but it's worth it once you can work out what it's saying. And what it's saying in plain English is that we're making a major world transition right now. And keep in mind, they wrote this book in 1995. And pretty much what they've said, for those of you who've read it, has happened. Like the digital currency move, things like that, governments doing what they're doing. And their next move, their predictions, is government just blatantly stealing money, and pretty much a collapse of civilization in the Western world as we know it. But the eventual result will be sovereign communities, sovereign individuals, and smaller groups is what they predict. So they predict a better world, but a tough path to get there. So I'm going to be covering a bit about today. I'll be covering a little bit about the coming crash, as best as I can explain why it's inevitable and why I predicted it, not because I'm some super great, anything other than just common sense really with this. I'm going to be sharing about why I believe it'll get worse before it gets better, but when it gets better, it'll get really good. And I'll be also just finishing off by quoting from Jim Rickards, who's a great economist and financial analyst. And some of the stuff he wrote last year in April, which he released in his blog last year, so 20 odd years ago, or so he wrote, 18 months ago, he wrote this blog, and he gave 5 things that he saw would be happening. And it's quite amazing when you read now what's happening and where we're moving towards now based on what he was saying in his blog. So protecting wealth and being sovereign in all areas is crucial. I think we'd all would agree. And starting the journey to becoming sovereign. And sovereign really means, as I'll be defining shortly, that you take control of your life and you make your own decisions about things, and you're in charge of every area of your life, whether it's your health or everything else. And there's just one of the things that I've noticed, and I was saying to someone and even taught my own sons, and I'll share the same with everyone else here. I've just always said to them, you just got to know what you want and make a decision. You won't settle for anything less. And it's amazing how things work when you make that decision. When you know what you want and you just won't settle for anything less, whether that's a relationship, like the kind of partner you're looking for. Most people inevitably settle for second best or stay with the one they've got, even though they know it doesn't really fulfill their soul and their heart's purpose. Many people stay in jobs they don't like just because of money fears and thinking that they really should stay there and just to keep their mortgage and keep their family happy. Most people, from my experience, they tend to compromise. Whereas moving forward, the only way you're going to get through this time is to make that decision that you're just going to, once you know what you want, that you won't settle for anything less. And once you make that decision, it's amazing how life works out. Years ago, I just made a decision that I wasn't going to participate in the census, and I just found a way around it. Years ago, I made a decision on certain things about traveling, and then the doors opened up for me. So what I've noticed is when you make a clear decision and you don't always know how it's going to come about, but it just seems to work out. And if you don't know or haven't been used to living like that, I would strongly encourage you to get used to that, to learning to live a little bit more by faith as well as being practical. So combine the two together. So the day is a little bit about sharing that message, but also the practical steps that one must take moving forward to protect your future, your wealth, and everything of that kind. So the elite know how to protect their wealth. They're really good at that. They don't trust governments as far as they can throw them. They know that government are big organised crime gangs. And as the sovereign individual said, they're pretty much aware that governments steal from the people regularly all the time. Most of the time, the stealing and the theft happens by stealth. They do it in very subtle ways, like they print more money, as you'll be hearing today. It's a very, very clever way of stealing money by diluting the money supply, printing it out and giving it to who they want to give it to, and the people's value of their wealth just actually reducing. That's probably the cleverest way, as Jack says, the invisible tax. The other one is, of course, things like bracket creep with taxes. They just don't change tax brackets for years and effectively increase taxes by just not changing the tax brackets. And generally putting law to define some kind of monetary seizure from people. Now, the elites and just people who are well educated are very aware this goes on. And it's not a conspiracy, it's just what actually happens in the real world. Governments generally always trying to get themselves elected. They're more concerned about the politics, except appeasing the masses who vote them in or out. And so therefore they go ahead and do the things that will make the masses stay happy. And even now, that's why I was just going through some polls over the last couple of days, and I was just shaking my head because still, by and large, the only thing that seems to have changed is the approval for lockdowns has seemed to have The love of that seems to have dropped quite significantly. So now governments, that's why they're opening up more. In terms of mandating jabs, the majority seem to basically want it. The small majority, by the way. So there's lots of good books that teach upon this. Jeanette talks about in the chat the YouTube Golden Dollar, how money became worthless. The other one is The Money Masters. It's a 3.5-hour documentary. If you haven't watched that, I strongly recommend you watch it. The Money Masters, 3.5 hours. It's a really great educational documentary on money. So keeping it is as important as making it. And right now, if anything, more important because than ever before. And there's a very good reason why the rich, and we've released some articles lately, how Donald Trump, Zuckerberg, many others have all been quietly buying private islands, buying like apartments on boats, which are sovereign like jurisdictions, getting out onto their own yachts and going into territorial waters, getting away from main cities, protecting themselves like retreats. And they're doing that for a reason. They see where things are potentially going to go. Many of them are selling off a lot of their properties where they can and just reducing all that holding down. Well, meanwhile, what just blows my mind is that, of course, what do the masses do? Go running in, property prices are booming at a record high, whereas by and large, most of the elite have been quietly pulling themselves away from a lot of those kind of stuff. So the lessons from history, the wealthy are just very educated. And I always say, there's a good reason why, say, Richard Branson is a billionaire or one of his guys, and most other people are not. He knows things and lives his life by stuff. And I remember being at a seminar where I heard him speak his philosophy, and I have to admit, it was brilliant, really brilliant, changed the whole way I saw quite a few things, the way and what was interesting with him was Branson, when he was asked about the biggest tips he would give young business owners and investors, he'd say what I just said to you before. He said, live by faith and do what your heart wants to do first and foremost. He said, and make a decision that you won't back off that. And then once you do, it's amazing how everything around you seems to make way to make it work. And he said, I'm not saying that you don't be practical, that you don't make sure you're making more money but expenses. But he said, ultimately, first and foremost, make a decision to follow what your heart wants to do. Because when you're doing something that you love doing, you're more inspired and you'll work harder inevitably in it without having to push yourself or someone around you. And that changed my life. That, really helped reaffirm certain beliefs I had and go to that next stage. And I find by and large, most of the wealthy do that. They live their life doing what they enjoy doing, but they always have their plan B. So, for example, they might say, hey, we're happy to live in Australia, or we're happy to live in the US, like we like living here. We like living in this part of England, wherever they like to live. But then they might just say, look, we are very realistically aware, though, where things are heading, and they've got their plan B when all else has failed. One of my clients is exercising his plan B, which is his Switzerland passport, second passport, all ready to go, because he just said to me, look, after living in Melbourne, he just said, look, I don't like where I see Melbourne going. He said, I've seen communism on many, many levels before, and he just said, don't have any illusions where this is heading in Melbourne, and I plan to be gone. And because he spent his life preparing for all that and having his backups, he has been able to do that. Whereas, of course, people who were in that situation have not been able to do that. So they have a plan to remain safe and ready to go if the shit hits the fan. So that's what you want to be ready for, if the shit hits the fan. So right now, global debt is going nuts. Like those of you who had Stephen's live stream with me yesterday would have heard him saying what's happening with inflation, which even shocked me. I've been hearing 30% for fuel increases and food and everything else. And Stephen actually said, no, he said, last 2 years, we've seen, it's been 30% this year, maybe, but it's probably been more than that. And he said the last 2 years, it's been like about 300%. Lumber's gone up 400%. There's shortages happening in fuel in various parts. It's happening with food. And it all comes down to the breaking down the supply chains. You keep locking down and you start mandating, experimental needles on truck drivers and essential workers. Well, some of them are not going to agree to it and going to go on strike or pull out. So I'm anticipating some crippling labour shortages in industries, and a little bit of a mess in the near future of all of this. And meanwhile, inflation, food prices have gone up in some parts and things like that. And it's very subtle. So you really do wish to be prepared and making sure that you're protecting your wealth, but you're finding a way to increase your income and all that kind of stuff. And is it hard work? It's very hard work. It's hard work, especially if you've been trained like most people to go to school, get a job. And as Larry Ellison from Dell once told a group of Harvard students, you've all been trained all your life to work for people like me who are school dropouts. So basically your destiny is going to be working for school dropouts like me. You've been trained to serve us. So a bit of a sobering reality. When I first heard that, I got very depressed because I had like 3 different degrees and thought I was pretty cool. And of course, I realized then that I was pretty much, majorly fucked, because I thought, well, I completely think like an employee. Best case scenario, I've got a very small self-employed mentality. And that got me on a very painful, difficult journey, which at times I thought I would never succeed. I failed in my first 3 businesses I tried simply because I thought too much like an employee. I didn't, management's not my greatest strength, and I found it hard to let go, as most self-employees do. Now, of course, I've got a good team. I've got Grace, we've got my son. There's a whole big team of us, and we all use our magic to make our business work. But it took a fair bit of work to get there. And generally, the best path forward in the days to come is to get sovereign, to get yourself learning to think like a business owner and income stream creator, learning to do that. And that's hard if you spent your whole life being used to a job. So, and like I said, you have my total empathy, which is why I do these webinars and do the best I can to at least show people the doorway and the steps that you've got to actually take. So things like inflation, costs, I'm predicting cryptos to go mainstream over the next little while. And that's why we do a lot of crypto investing and staking and income creation ourselves. We've upped it right up. I've got my son and myself and another guy. We do it together. I see it going mainstream. I see some fairly major gains of that. I see the same with stocks. But I see some very good times followed by some very bad times. That's where we see things going. Very good times followed by very bad times. So number one is knowing how to cash in on the good times, but knowing also when to get out and be prepared for the bad times. So this great reset, which we're talking about, which seems a fantastic proposition, but when economies melt down, as Venezuela, as Greece, and that show, what eventually happens is that currencies and systems just fall apart and stop actually working completely. They just don't work. So the reset button, so basically what this great reset's talking about, it's a plan to reset world currencies. The dangerous thing about this is not so much the fact that we're talking about resetting a currency, because debt jubilee starting again has been done many, many times before. And sometimes a debt jubilee and a new currency is the only way forward. And it can work out actually quite well if done fairly, if done equity, if done responsibly. But it doesn't work quite so well when all that's happening is that they're really just using it as a way to take from the middle-class wealthy and give it to everyone else, because the middle-class wealthy don't particularly like that, having done all the work. And when effectively the elite walk away unscathed and richer. So that's the problem with this reset. The other problem is the Great Reset is talking about, like this pandemic thingo, is just having all countries reset at around about the same time. And rather than countries resetting as they, if they actually need to, like I'm sure US will eventually do it and move to a digital dollar, as will Australia. So we're heading for a cashless society of some form. And the question is, how prepared and how set up are we going to be? So sovereignty always means that you have the power to govern yourself with no interferences and look after your own life and not look outside yourself. This is one of the reasons why, for me, if you've got a job, for example, or you've got employment, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not sovereign. If you're in the right kind of work, and if you're in a position where you can walk away if you need to. I had a client, for example, who medical practitioner, but he'd spend his time building very good passive income, really looking after his wealth very carefully. And of course, when they started mandating jabs for him, he just calmly said, okay, guys, well, I'm out of here. And a bit shocked, but he just said, I'm out of here. And he could do that because he had spent his life preparing for these times and being very nervous as to where he thought things could go. So he was building good passive incomes. He was building good other businesses on the side. So he just kind of said, okay, well, I'm out of here, guys. I'm not going to be part of mandating jabs on anyone. Thank you very much. And certainly not upon my own body. So as I said to him, you know, very noble, but at the same time, he was in a position to be noble very easily because he had prepared his life preparing for it. So when civilizations embrace socialism, this is the kind of crap that starts happening. These are just pictures taken from Venezuela, which is a really good modeling to use for what's coming because of what happened over there. A very prosperous, very advanced nation who got taken over by socialism, becoming mentally lazy in their prosperity. And eventually their currency went out of control from all the money printing. And then, of course, the not so much start taking or wanting to steal from those who've got. So you also start seeing this, and not because there's a lack of food. I mean, there's lots of food in Australia. There's lots of food in America. But when you've got supply chains breaking down and you've got like critical staff, you've still got people bunched in major cities, you have risks of these things starting to transpire. And I don't like to speak things over which aren't happening, but in some parts of Australia and America, they're happening. And it's just important that you're, again, prepared, you've got things in place and you're taking preventative measures. And best case scenario, none of this happens quite as badly as it could do. One thing I can see that could definitely happen is bank runs. So like food shortages, I'll definitely see happening with some groups of people. It will probably happen in some regions who will be caught out, would not be prepared. Bank runs is fairly inevitable. The Great Depression was full of bank runs. The GFC saw some ones as well. And so, yeah, my guess is that we're not too far off from seeing that kind of stuff start happening as people start wanting to pull out cash from the banks. And I'm already noticing banks hold less cash than they used to. So this is why they passed this Bank Bail-in Act in 2018, no doubt because they knew this was coming, and no doubt because governments knew that at some stage that the bank system was going to collapse and they're going to have to bail it out and keep the system going. One of my recent little hobbies, and I've always been aware of the fact that the Australian government is a registered corporation in Washington, but I was looking a little bit more into it. And of course, the Commonwealth government is actually a registered what's called securitized corporation, where they had investors that could invest in them. And so, and of course, it lists as its assets 25 million citizens. So basically, I'm just shaking my head laughing, going, gosh, it's not even hidden. They registered and did a whole big offering to foreign people. So this is the kind of shit that's going on, you know, and there's no doubt this won't end well. And they showed that with the Biosecurity Act, and things like this don't actually end well. And Jack, yeah, under the Queen of Australia, yeah, that stupid Australia Act that was designed to fix things. I mean, my take on constitutional law is simple. We're still under a monarchy. We're still Britain's bitch in Australia, and we're still a prison colony. And everything that's played out confirms my theory. So today it's about protecting your wealth from what's ahead, and safety first, as I've mentioned before. And you'll be learning that on the weekend for those of you who are coming. We're going to really teach a lot about that. And then, of course, next month will be the income streams one. That I'm really looking forward to, because we're going to have some really good crypto teaching in the next one on how to, people who've made good money from cryptos. We're going to be teaching about trading in the one next month. We're going to be teaching about like trading and writing options. We're going to be teaching about business ways to make money. I've got Stephen turning up to show ways to make money in that from investing and take advantage of the incredible opportunities that are going to be ahead the next 12 to 18 months or so. So, yeah, so that's going to be the next one. This particular one is about safety, because you've got to make sure that you're protected. And I spend most of our time at Global Wealth Club, another company, WealthSafe, fixing up people's messes who've made money without being properly structured. So this is why I'm really hoping people come to this and start their plan to get properly structured. So then as they start investing, they can minimize their taxes and keep the money they're making. So, okay, so why do things will get worse than everyone thinks? I shared this 18 months ago. So what I'm sharing now is I'm virtually going to repeat a lot of stuff I shared on a webinar 18 months ago, because everything I said has pretty much, from this webinar, it's been right on cue. So it's a good reminder of where things are going. It's been right on cue so fast. So basically our current money system of just printing money, it's always throughout history. Every 45 or 90 years, there's some kind of reset every time. 90 years are full, 45 are partial. Last full reset 90 years ago, 1933, or basically 88 years ago. Our last what's called partial reset 1971. That was about 40 years afterwards. The gold one in 1975, there was another kind of one. So there's no doubt in my mind, sometimes the next couple of years, we're heading for something of some kind to take place. So our current money system, you can't just print money and dilute wealth without causing problems, because people lose confidence in the currency and they start giving it, and they start going elsewhere. History in Venezuela and Greece, both these countries, Cyprus, Greece, these both show what happens. You start getting all kinds of problems, like when you start printing money, and you just eventually, people lose confidence in the currency and the wealthy start pulling their money out. In the sovereign individual, the Roman Empire, it talked about what happened there. As Rome cracked down and started doing the same mistakes we're doing today, what did they do? They just started pulling their money out of Rome, and they started putting their money in all kinds of other places, and eventually Rome panicked, started trying to crack down on that, and eventually the whole system collapsed. So the third one is people. Generally 90 years goes by, there's not many people left who actually saw the Great Depression. I can remember my grandmother when I was like a teenager telling me all about it, and she's now passed on, and there's very, very few people that are alive today. Not a large amount of people, of course, who lived through the Great Depression. There are people, but they're definitely the minority. The modern day people are taught the same myths that they were taught 90 years ago, just before 1929 crash. And that's that. It's different this time. It's different. It won't happen again like that. We're more sophisticated. We're more intelligent. We're more advanced than we were back then. We've got better safeguards. No, we're just even more stupid because we're more intellectual, and we've let things go even longer than before. So if anything, I think intelligence has made us even more dumber, because we're letting stuff go on right now. At least our forefathers in 1920 just refused to let themselves be mandatorily jabbed, and within a matter of only a few months, they stopped doing it. The same happened in 1976 with swine flu, whereas the modern day generation are so kind of weakened and entitled that, yeah, the experience just blows my mind. Not prepared for this kind of time, just wanted to go away, used to McDonald's fast food, used to quick Ubers, and they just think, get a quick jab and that will solve everything. Or get a quick this, or let's just print some more money. And it will end that. It will end that. And so you just want to be prepared for that and well covered. This is a big thing. Many of you would notice that supply chains and getting goods is longer than before. Some things can take ages. New cars can take ages. I'm getting a new laptop at the moment, and my new laptop is pretty much as I was told. It's just basically some way away at the moment, was what I was told. Like it's, they told me that, yep, it's very hard to get certain laptops now because things have changed. And it's, whereas before, laptops were very, very easy and very plentiful. And no doubt more and more that happens. And when shortages happen, inevitably you can see prices go up and people start using and taking advantage of the situation and things like that. And I'm sure you all know what I mean. I'm sure some of you have seen that kind of stuff happening and have noticed this kind of stuff and everything of that kind. So definitely interesting times right now, like really, really interesting times. And no doubt that we're heading for some, you know, very, very interesting days, so to speak. So that's the supporting and supply chain. So really learning to go more local, live locally where you can, rely locally, a good time to do that. more and more people thinking fictional investments. The number of people who think like digital gold is the same as normal gold because they're used to cryptos. Fictional can give you great speculative gains, but it's interesting that most of the elite are heavily focused on physical assets right now, as well as some digital, but they're heavily focused. The biggest thing I've also noticed is the right and wrong and how absolutely it's just kind of disappeared. You know, the sense of right and wrong we've got right now, it's just really, you know, just insane, so to speak. Like, it's just, yeah, people are just agreeing to stuff that you almost can't imagine feasible. Like, it's perfectly okay right now to, you know, assert your rights to give your 6-year-old a sex change and then for to assert one, but then it's not okay for you to question about having an experimental needle, and even worse in Australia, which is next level, even being told what needle you've got to get. At least in America, they have a fairly wide range of choices, for example, including taking the Johnson & Johnson or Novavax, which is actually a lot, which is a more traditional vaccine and not as experimental as the other ones. And they're being told, well, now you've got no choice. You can't wait for that. So Australia is kind of like a whole new next level. So yeah, as Aidan says, a moral order and sense of ethics evaporate in the 80s. Yeah, look, it's been evaporating for some time. And the same happened with Rome. Moral order disappeared. People started living for themselves. The sense of honoring higher law, like common law, God's law, however you see God. One thing about a healthy, prosperous, free society, they've always had Almighty God as basically the head of society, and not any particular religion so much, but just like, for example, I'm involved in a very all-inclusive new religion we're running, which is really about bringing everyone back to God. And the truth is, although I've had a Christian background, I've had a lot to do with Buddhism, Hinduism, many others, and found in many of them really the same messages being taught. So generally in a healthy society, there's a very good sense of moral order, ethics, doing what's fair, doing what's right by one another. We've seen a lot of that break down, and that unfortunately has left us wide open for this. And the seventh thing is, of course, social media means that stuff that's going on. I mean, people are freaking out because they just keep watching the news all day and reading the news. I mean, I hardly read it myself. And just get on with life as best as I can. And I just keep an eye on it once a day just so I know what's going on. Why will this go on longer than everyone thinks? Just people go into denial. And even people who would regard themselves as relatively switched on, I found there's a level of denial that's going on. Less so now. People are starting to become a little bit less in denial. But by and large, people are all concerned with the immediate issue, for example, like the jab, but they forget about the bigger issues when you got human rights and freedoms being taken away, where you start to see eventual economic impacts and thievery and not being prepared for those times. And if it's bad enough having your medical freedoms taken from you, the breaking point for many will be where they lose their money and can't basically live anymore, and they've got kids, they've got everything else. So people, it's human nature to be in denial and to avoid taking action. I said last year that the lag effect of locking down the world, eventually it's going to hit. I wasn't sure when. I predicted the lag effect would probably be sometime this year or next year. It seems to be more late this, now it's just starting to hit, I think next year especially. So the lag effect starts to hit, where all the lockdowns, all the supply chains, all that kind of stuff is starting to hit already, and I think it will hit even more so. So that's another reason it will go longer. I think we've got quite a few years ahead of some challenges. History shows this. It shows that the longer things stay in boom and you stay in denial, the worse the problem gets. It's a little bit like you've got pain in your body and you push through it, as I did years ago. I pushed through it. Eventually, one day I'm sitting on a computer typing, and literally all my nerves just twanged. I felt this pop, and I knew I was in serious trouble. Like this shooting pins and needles are shooting down my body. I went home. I came back next day. I started typing. It seemed to be a bit better. Within 10 minutes, it was back. And now I realized I had a real problem. And eventually I worked out I'd had a major autonomic immune system breakdown, a fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, RSI, or a nervous system complete misfiring. And it took me 5 years to get right. And again, I left that for a fairly long time. And one thing now, as soon as I see problems in health, even remotely, I'm onto it. I get regular health checkups. I regularly go over our finances. I'm always looking for flaws to see what's going on. So lessons from history. Ancient prophecy, there's been plenty of predictions and spiritual prophets and others, Dead Sea Scrolls, Holy Bible, Bhagavad Gita, Mayan writings, futurists like Harry Dent, Sovereign Individual, all predicted a chaotic breakdown, but it would eventually lead to a new age. Some call it the age of Aquarius, some call it the golden age, some call it the millennium, some call it the information age of the mind. There's all kinds of different age, but we are moving into a new, better age. And all the futurists generally seem to suggest, bad as yet, but by 2032, a lot of what's going on will end and we'll be entering a new age by then. But we're going to have a very challenging 10 years ahead in different forms. The time tends to slow down in challenging times, like when it's really tough. I remember being in chronic pain in 2009 when something happened to my neck. And it only was like six to 7 weeks it lasted. But that was a long 6 to 7 weeks. Oh, it felt like 6, 7 years. So, I'm sure many of you now, it feels like time has slowed down with what's going on in the world. If you feel like that, just type yep in the text chat. If you feel that, like it's kind of almost slowed down. The sixth one is the extremes of duality. Yeah, a few people. Extremes of duality as well that we have, where you tend to have high booms like we've had for the last 40 years. You tend to have a very high collapse. So, and the snowballing effect. What you tend to find when life is going well, everything just seems to get better. When shit hits the fan, more shit seems to happen. It just seems to be some kind of law of life. So, snowballing effect. So why will it be better than people think? New era of conscious business. I'm already noticing like a difference. People are questioning ethics, questioning the insane way we've been living our life as a Western world. I'm noticing people are better to deal with. Internet scammers are becoming very unpopular now. People are looking for legitimate business. People are tending to be more discerning. People are like what I'm doing now. I'm very much on the business of, providing really great value for a very good. My aim is like Wallace Wattle says in The Science of Getting Rich, to give people far more in value than they actually pay me. He says that's the secret to riches, is that you just give insane value to people. So I've been really big on insane value, and I'm finding more and more people are going that path, just giving back insane value. In fact, Ken Wilber, the other thing I would mention on this new age we're entering into, Ken Wilber, he, in his book about New Religion of Tomorrow, about tiers of consciousness, is saying that what's happening, as I've mentioned, for some of you would have heard me before, from a stage 5 to a stage 6. So the stage 5 is all about achievement, money, and corporate. Stage 6 is a benevolent, not-for-profit, social enterprise giving back. So what he predicted was it would go back from a 5 to a 4, which means more to a black and white, dogmatic, feudalist type of era for a short time, but that would lead to a quantum leap to a more giving back. So we're going to see a much better giving back world, people joining community. I've made more friends this year than probably in the last number of years combined. I've been a hermit. People are really teaming up, joining forces. They're forming aligned, awake groups together and things like that. And people just generally starting to look after each other a whole lot better than they did before. That's one thing I'm noticing. The opportunity right now is insane. Gosh, there's so many great opportunities happening right now. Like investment-wise, I see cryptos is moving into the stage 5 of the Elliott wave, going mainstream. I think we're going to see some great profits in the days ahead. I don't know if it started just yet, but I think once Bitcoin clearly breaks its high, I reckon we're heading for some really, apart from the normal inevitable tracebacks, we're going to be heading for some really good days, and not just Bitcoin. There's so many opportunities, and members in the Global Wealth Club would know that. I'm noticing more and more people are going like growing their own food. They're more community-based, less corporate, small cities and regions will prosper, things like that. Instant social media and things like that. So social media, which can be a negative thing, but can be a great thing in an awake society. So in a more benevolent society, social media can give so much more exposure over things like that. The big thing I'm noticing is people becoming more financially responsible. A very, very wealthy client of mine once said to me, he said, everyone gets fat in a boom, but they get lean in a recession. So I'll say that again. He said, everyone gets fat in a boom, but gets lean in a recession. In other words, he says companies and everyone increase their spending. They bring on more consultants. They start buying better cars, upgrading. In a recession, they cut back on expenses and they get rid of staff that are not performing and that are weak. So that's probably another thing I'll mention. One of the best things you could do is be damn good at what you do, because there's going to be cuts and culls coming. And of course, if you're really good at what you do, people won't want to lose you and they'll find a way to keep you. And I know of situations of people. I've actually had someone I know who, even though technically they can't go anymore and do what they're doing with a particular person for work or whatever, the person said to me, look, I'm not supposed to have you, but I'm going to find a way to keep you. And we'll just work around this law somehow because you're just so good. There's no way I'm losing you. So that's another thing too. New system, more fair and rewarding of productive leaders. In our business, I'm very much like that. You know, we really good staff and good people. And I tell people who work with us as contractors or whatever, I say, you know, you help us make more money and do amazing by us. We'll make sure you get rich with us. And like, I'm really happy doing our crypto syndicate, for example, with me, my son, and there's another guy who's our personal trainer. And he's brilliant with it. He's been studying all this stuff. And of course, my gift is being able to get opportunities and come up with the ways to do things. But he's a very good implementer. And as I said to him, I said, look, end of the day, I just want to get you. If I get you rich, you get me rich. We all get wealthier than ever before. We all get more money coming in. We're all going to be happy. And of course, for him, it's a great deal because he was getting very nervous that he might be forced to take the jab as a trainer. And so, of course, he said to me, I want to make sure I've got my own sovereign income. So I've got choices. So a new economic system, more fair and rewarding. And of course, ancient prophecy predicts it will get a whole lot better. So really, this is why taking a radical, realistic view, and you'll be learning about this more this weekend, cutting unnecessary expenses, being efficient, become more lean in your life, get rid of things that don't actually help serve you in your business or life. Look at worst case scenario, don't live in a false hope. So a lot of people are freaking out with what's going on because they weren't ready for it and buried their head in the sand and hoped it wouldn't come to that. The smart people were already taking steps and preparing for worst case scenarios, and I know plenty of them. So it's really important that, I mean, right now especially, even if things haven't affected you indirectly, there's a good chance it will. So it's a good chance to learn from where maybe you missed opportunities and missed what was coming up here, and make sure with your investments and with your money that you're well prepared for this, that you're well prepared, you're leaning out your expenses, you're cutting things down and things like that. So, and to finish off, Jim Rickards' Decoming Financial Crisis and Return to Gold. I mean, I don't agree with everything this guy says, by the way. He thinks gold is the be-all and end-all. I can't say I'm completely on board with him. And most of the high net worth people I know agree with me on this. The general feeling is very much a balanced portfolio is the way to go. Gold is definitely a great part of a strategy in silver, but there's problems with gold and silver as well, which we'll be sharing it this weekend. But it definitely is part of the plan, as well as others. But about 80%, 90% of what this guy teaches is brilliant. It's first class, you know. So I'm actually going to quote from some of his stuff in his blog last year. So this is what he predicted last year. He wrote a couple of good books, highlights, and he was involved in consulting all kinds of governments and high net worth people. So he knows his stuff. So he's been predicting a collapse of the monetary system and a global currency reset for some time. He, along with Porter Stainsbury, who wrote a book called 2020 Jubilee. Stainsbury is a brilliant research investor and an economist, and I'm a big member of his, and we invest in a lot of the recommendations that they give. Stainsbury's predicting a complete jubilee and reset of the economy and universal incomes, and they're going to do this, and the system will collapse. And Rickards even goes further, and he says you're going to have a world currency, world tax system. Maybe not all countries, but a number of countries for a time, he sees subscribing to this. So he talks a lot about Trump, for example, and how Trump was, people say there was no one ever like Trump, whereas Rickards said, well, no, there's actually been 3 other Donald Trumps in the American presidency. He said on average every 100 years, there seems to be this protectionist that comes up. Washington was one. There was Andrew Jackson. There was Theodore Roosevelt, Ted Roosevelt, and Donald Trump. All protectionists make America great. And all 4 of them did not get on well with the media. All 4 of them are very much trying to protect against globalism. And he said, by and large, to protect the best interests of their countries. He said 5 things in that particular blog, which I'll discuss a bit more about. Fed bails out the banks, but who'll bail out the Fed when it collapses? Get ready for world money. It's coming soon. What's worse than pandemics and economic loss? The World Criminal Court that he sees coming in, and the government seal of approval to work, travel, or function economically. And he said all this last year. So the Fed bails out the banks, but he says, but who's going to bail out the Fed? So this is, I'm just quoting a lot of what he said here. So basically, he pretty much said 2008 only staved off the inevitable. He believes America basically collapsed in 2007, but they've artificially propped it up on a life support machine. That's how he describes it somewhere else. So America's been on life support since 2008, is what he says. This was more than just rhetoric. By the way, Donald Trump said the same thing in his book, Why We Want You to Be Rich, in 2013. So he then goes through and explains about how US are just printing money like no tomorrow. And now, in fact, this is my own comment I added for this slide. We're now printing $120 billion a week. They're just printing money like no tomorrow. They're just giving lots of money. They're forgiving loans. They're just giving it away. And they're just completely thrown all caution to the wind. One article, he basically urges the IMF, the International Monetary Fund in Europe, to go big, to bail out the world. And that's why we're talking about great resets. Yeah, I meant 120 billion a month, sorry. I was just corrected. That's what I meant, yeah, typo. The other author was Gordon Brown, who was responsible for selling gold. So what they're saying is that the world is turning to the IMF. The IMF does this thing called special drawing rights, which is a new form of money, and he predicts that inevitably that's going to turn into some kind of reset or money and world money system. And he then goes on his next point, the special drawing rights to bail out the global financial system when it completely melts down, which he says will happen. He says they were used in a small way during the crisis, but it didn't have a lot of impact because it was small. It took a long time to get done, but he predicts that it's giving you an idea of what's going to be used when things really happen, a really big meltdown happens. So he says, now the next crisis is here. We're in the beginnings. They're finding a way to prop it up. But he's saying there's going to be plenty of money printed, giving away to adversaries. They're holding up SPRs, but he's predicting that there'll be some kind of new world money coming in. He even predicts that China may have their own conditions. The US may be more desperate. So he says he basically sees a whole monetary system melting down quite considerably, and why he's saying investors want to be having gold as part of their strategy. So what's worse than a pandemic? He says unemployment, loss, wealth, and business failure are not the worst outcomes, but gangs of looters and vigilante. In 1923, hyperinflation in Weimar, Germany, armed gangs left the cities for the countryside. They looted farms, slaughtered livestock, and killed farmers. In the 1975 to 90 civil war in Lebanon, car bombs, sniper fire, kidnappings, and house bombs. Late antiquity featured city dwellers abandoning cities and reverting to an agrarian existence. The same thing's happening in, right now in parts of America. They defunded the police in Minnesota. If you ring the emergency line, you can't even get a cop now with that. So criminals pretty much know they can do what they want, and they can bomb places, they can riot. But apparently the crime and the violence in certain parts of America is atrocious. Seattle's got some similar problems from what I've been told. So yeah, we're seeing initial signs of this already. So what he also says, like Venezuela had this problem. Imagine you've got paper, you got real gold, and people find out you've got real gold, and civilization's broken down. of course, what he says is what's going to happen. People are going to go looking for people who got the gold and basically steal their gold or kill them. So that's one of the reasons why having a strategy in place, as you can see, is really important. You know, I've got all kinds of strategies in place for this kind of things. I've got my own like camper trailer beginning, there's stuff like that. That's why we do a lot of our own spiritual work and clearing work and energy work. Some of you may know, because all of that I see as part of a big strategy. Because when civilization breaks down, as Venezuela shows, as Germany shows, as almost everywhere shows, people who can't eat, who can't feed their kids, panic and do crazy things. So martial law, if that starts happening, gets imposed even more strongly, but even forces of order can be quickly overwhelmed. And he says that nerves are still worn thin. People are furious about the fact that bankers and the elite get away with it. The French Revolution shows eventually people snap and they want to make the elite accountable. And they start wanting to hang Daniel Andrews from the stake or burning him or shooting him or whatever. And people start talking about that. And it starts to become a real thing. And Australia's got a particularly interesting situation because they don't have guns. So there may be other ways or all sorts of stuff. So again, it's a really good time to prepare, plan, be ready without letting fear hit you, turn that energy into practical action. And that's what Jim Rickards talks about. So he says bartenders, waitresses, hairstyles are being fired by the millions, but the bankers are doing just fine. He says this time the reaction will not be quiet acceptance, but more vocal opposition and protest. So he said extreme forms of social collapse could happen. So that's why he says physical bullion is one way, of course, having food, growing your own food, being mobile. There's various things you can do. And that's what we'll be sharing at the event that we're doing this Saturday, sorry. So the International Criminal Court, he just mentioned about this, and although it's a bit of a side thing, he talks about how the fact that for US, it's a real danger because they're trying, this lady, Bensouda, who's a former advisor who runs the ICC, is particularly keen to get US people basically in trouble and less about China, which tends to be able to do whatever they want, as Jim Rickards says, which runs his camps and rich organs from human victims and things like that. So this is basically Jim Rickards' words. Bensouda's new case accused the US of war crimes, is pushing back by denying visas to ICC staff and considering economic sanctions. In the meantime, American businesses and official travelers need to exercise caution when traveling in case they end up in the crosshairs of the ICCs. So this is just an aside thing that he mentioned here. It's a real threat. But here's a big one I wanted to lead to. And this is from Jim Rickards. And keep in mind, he's not religious, and he openly said that. But he said, the Bible and Book of Revelation, sometimes refers to the apocalypse, says this. And he calls us all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or with foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save that they had the mark, the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Now, he says this refers to the fact of an end-time prophecy, but a totalitarian government. And by the way, in 1988, I was taught about all this by a man called Barry Smith, and he even was showing how in 1984, a man called Henry Davis invented a machine that enabled microchipping in the right hand and forehead, which could then allow tracking. Last year in 2020, various groups, including Microsoft, lodged patents for cryptocurrencies and technology that could basically be implanted into humans to track them through central computer systems, to be able to, you know, give money into their bank account within their nervous systems, be able to read their thoughts, read their vital signs and everything's for a new form of healthcare where they can basically, you know, do program uploads into people. So basically a form of transhumanism. So he says it would enforce its beliefs by preventing subjects from earning a living, excuse me, everyone, unless they displayed outward signs of loyalty to the regime. So yeah, patent 060606, 20th of March 2020. Something like this is going on in China today, where social credit score is calculated based on behaviour approved by the CCP. Those with low scores are prevented from boarding trains and planes, denied admission to desirable schools, not hired for jobs. It's enforced for digital surveillance, including facial recognition software and AI databases. So a more benign but no less intrusive version is emerging in Sweden, where millennials and Generation Z are lining up to digital chips implanted under their skin so they can conduct financial and other personal transactions by near proximity to a scammer that can read the chips. And this is quite a growing trend. Wisconsin are doing it as well, and various other places. So as Rickards says, if it sounds far-fetched, it's not. Something similar may be coming to the US quite soon, according to sources. Many Americans have survived the coronavirus with mild cases or no symptoms. Such survivors have antibodies. Dr. Fauci suggested that Americans could carry a digital certificate stating they're safe to go about their business unimpeded. So, of course, this little passport we all know about. Without the antibodies, no certificate. In effect, he said this will divide Americans to those who receive a mark showing they could buy or sell and those who do not. The Bible is not regarded by many as a financial handbook, but its comments on debt, jubilees, gold coin, tax investing, parable talents, and other financial topics are prescient. Maybe it's time to brush up on the book of the Apocalypse too. Let's just say, reading this article, I was very glad I learnt the Bible from young, and I learnt all this kind of stuff. And after hearing Barry Smith in 1988, kind of freaked out a little bit at the time and started preparing my life in readiness that this would actually come to pass. So I personally think that there's no question that we're heading this way. I think now, speaking with Stephen Pettit, what we see is that there will be nations that will inevitably go here. My prediction is Europe especially will almost certainly go here. Parts of America, possibly even parts of Australia, New Zealand. Some parts will choose to break away and go sovereign. Some parts of Australia may choose to succeed or break up, as Stephen was saying yesterday, like Queensland breaking in half to the North Queensland, WA breaking away, or even parts of WA. So no doubt that this is where we're heading. And this is why my personal view goes even further. A spiritual solution is just as important as a financial one. And if you're not doing something about your spiritual walk or your spiritual life or whatever else, as well as your financial, that's another part of protecting. I will actually share with everyone, that's been my biggest asset protection strategies. I've done everything I can on finances, but I spent a lot of my last 20 years in secret and mystery schools, studying the Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, the writings of Joseph Smith, every book I could lay my hands on, learning everything I can about clearing karma, about understanding the laws of karma, the laws of the afterlife, the laws of the soul journey, everything, and basically started a very awake, very switched on new breed of church, which is really meant to be all-inclusive, an all-inclusive kind of work that's designed to help, people wherever they're at come back to God in their own way. So not kind of, as Ken Wilber puts in his book, A New Religion of tomorrow, he says basically is going to be an inclusive one, but it's going to be about raising consciousness and helping society grow. That's been one of the things that's disgusted me, is how the churches that are meant to be pushing back and will always throughout the Western world in the last 100 years would push back against laws that were unjust and made a big difference, have just bowed over straight away. Rodney Howard-Browne in Florida, someone I'd love to see speak on a rally, and I want to hopefully do a webinar of him one time. He pushed back with the lockdowns, everything last year, and said, how dare you tell the Church of God to lock down? And he refused to do it, went to jail for it. Within a week, they let him out, apologizing profusely, and promised him they wouldn't lock down the churches again. And Florida is now an example of freedom, but it started because someone pushed back, So questions. So again, as I mentioned, anything in the chat I won't be answering. You got to put your questions in the Q&A. So Sharon, what time frame did they put on the sovereign communities? They didn't really put one, Sharon. They just gave an overall thing in the sovereign individual. It seems to be suggesting around 2030, 2040. That's my reading of the whole thing. So that's where I see that. Jeanette, has the link for the weekend been sent out yet? I'll let my team answer that one, Jeanette. If so, I've missed it, we'll be sending it again. We'll be giving the link also for people to sign up, but I think the link for the actual event hasn't been sent out yet, no. Philip, what is the concept behind holding physical gold and silver as a means of exchange should shit hit the fan? I understand as a means to protect capital, but not as a transactional tool when things turn grim, as it'd be difficult to transact in physical gold and silver to barter. Philip, I couldn't agree with you more. This is why what I've taught in other webinars, and we teach you on the weekend, is balanced portfolio. I see physical gold as just one part of a balanced portfolio. I don't see it as necessarily being a currency thing, although in saying that, if we really hit an apocalypse, people might be physically handling gold and silver in small regional communities. But by and large, and that's why many people are buying gold and silver coins in readiness for that. That's why they've actually taken off more than nuggets in the last year and a half. But even so, by and large, this is why I'm a big believer in a balanced portfolio. You have some physical gold, you might have some digital, you have a bit of everything. That's how I see it. But overall, it's a good comment, and I agree with you. Harry, is there a copy of last night's talk? Yes, there is. I'll let my team answer you on that one there. Mark, force on digital ID and getting access to food at shops, or will they prevent you getting on internet without one? Again, a very good question. And there's a lot unknown. There's no doubt that the eventual microchipping will be having that issue, because the Bible says about the buying and selling issue. So no doubt. Is that going to happen in the immediate future? Well, nothing's impossible. I'm not so sure that will happen immediately, but it's certainly showing me that you could expect that there's a possibility that they might do that as a trial run, especially as Australia seems to be the guinea pig bunnies for the New World Order. So, yeah, I think it's not off the cards. I don't think it's likely in the immediate future, but that said, I'm not saying that with any conviction. So having alternative ways, having some physical cash, having some physical, things like that. I'm looking at alternative sources of, internet bank accounts. My feeling is not all banks will do this. Some Australian banks might do that, but you may, for example, have offshore banks that don't do this and things like that. And there are certain banks in Australia that may not do this again, and that's what we'll be teaching on the weekend. There's some events that work very, very differently. So, but it's a good question that you've raised. Jeanette, when the main crash happens, will the blockchain crypto collapse as well? Well, that's a bit of an unknown, isn't it? I mean, myself and John D. Martini and quite a lot of others, I see crypto as having a great place in terms of technology and digital and that. For a currency, I just don't see it as the way of the future, but the technology is not quite there yet, and the adoption. There's some believe that crypto could actually shoot up when that happens. Some believe that will crash with it. My view is that it could be either way. If anything, I think it will probably, crypto will eventually have its own collapse myself. Because I'm not 100% sure, that's why I have a balanced portfolio. I have some cryptos, have some gold, have some cash, have some shares, have a bit of everything. But in that way, you're covered for all contingencies. My view is that Bitcoin, for example, and Ethereum, for example, are much stronger cryptos than the others. So I personally like Bitcoin and Ethereum more than the others, but I do have others as well. So that's my own little comment. Derek, is there a way to find out who owns a Commonwealth Australia US corporation? Mate, I've been trying to find out. I'm hoping to find some really good researchers in our group that will do that. I do know a guy years ago who almost got there. He worked over 87% of major public companies and that were owned by these shadow corporations. So yeah, if anyone can find that out, I'd be very grateful, because I'm having difficulty. Sharon, it could be possible many of us picked up antibodies to CV. Is there legitimate testing place for this? We could see if it's the case. Yeah, I don't really know on that one. So there's definitely some challenges ahead next year, that's for sure. So on all this kind of stuff. So I'm just having a quick look at some of the chats that are more recent. Frank says cash will always be handy to have as a medium of exchange rather than gold. Yeah, look, I agree. That's why balanced portfolio, having some cash in the bank, having some cash on hand, having some gold, a bit of everything, because again, you just don't know exactly what's going to happen. You can only guess. So that's my comment on that one. Okay. So let me see, there's one more question. Michael says, I've got cash, metals and a profitable business and feel in a good, strong position, but I have a mortgage. But if I sold my business, I'd be almost debt-free, but no income. Selling the house to get land, live off grid to speak. Your thoughts? Well, I can't really give lifestyle advice, but what you're saying is not completely uncommon, Michael. Like a lot of people are starting to do that. If you are thinking of selling a house to go off grid, a very good time to do it when the market's booming, because you're going to get a quick buyer and you're going to get a lot more than you would otherwise. So if you are thinking about selling your house, certainly in the next little while is a good time to do it if you do go that path. And I emphasize the if you go down that path. And again, you don't know. I mean, you could sell it and it could go up another 40%. You think, damn, I wish I'd waited. But that's the nature of speculation. So yeah, if you sold your business almost debt-free but no income, so selling the house to live off ground. Yeah, look, I'm not a big fan of property right now myself, residential. I'm just not myself. I'm not saying I'm right on that one. I'm just not. I think it's a big tie to the land. Governments can easily take taxes off property. If governments want to mess around with your money and just increase the taxes, as New York and California are showing, where they've absolutely exploded the taxes on properties. So, yeah, Jeanette, I've answered that about the link for the weekend, you know. So I already answered that question before. I said that it hasn't been sent out yet, and that for my understanding, and yeah, the team will be basically, yeah, okay, mistake, yeah, no worries, okay. Just wasn't sure if you heard it. Risk is rentals, might ask. Yeah, look, my one thing I will say, and this is purely my guess, and I'm not saying it with any real like massive confidence, but I'm saying my guess, based on past responses, mandatory jabs generally have about a 6 to 9 month lifespan. Delta Airlines has already come out and pushed back and changed their mind and says they're not going to enforce the jab for a job. This is what I was told yesterday. Some companies are going to get such staffing shortages, they're going to reverse their policy. It'll get very interesting in states like WA, Victoria, New South Wales, a few others where they're mandating it in certain situations. That's what it really will. That's when it will get really interesting in states like that, and how long governments will hold out and allow crippling shortages and things like that. Okay, well, anyway, like I said, that's just my take on things. I do think we're heading into some great economic prosperity times ahead in the next little while, because while they're printing money, this can last a bit longer. So don't let the fear completely cripple you or kind of make you stop. If anything, right now, there's going to be some great opportunities to cash up. And if you're wise and like a squirrel and know how to squirrel your money away for winter, that's going to inevitably come, for the dark winter, you could actually, you know, you'll be in a much better position to get through this, especially if you're taking a paranoid worst case scenario. And that's my summary. A paranoid worst case scenario is a good way to be right now. I'm a paranoid worst case scenario, and I'm very happy. I'm enjoying life because I'm covering everything that could possibly go wrong on every possible base imaginable. And we'll be talking about everything, about licenses that you may have for regular, to be a Cairo, to be this or whatever. I'll be talking about all that on the weekend. So for those of you, most of you seem to be coming to that event, so you're going to really enjoy that. Stephen's going to be speaking as well. And we've got Virgil, the Singaporean gold guy, speaking as well. So hang on, this is being a bit naughty. Okay. So coming up is our live event for this weekend. So if the team could just put the link in there. It's a one-day event. We've kept it really affordable and exceptional value as best as possible. So we're going to be live streaming it. So it'll be live face-to-face in Perth at the Pan Pacific for those of you in Perth who like the face-to-face connection and to meet me and meet other people and chat. And we're going to be live streaming it, and we're going to be keeping recordings for people so that people actually get, you know, lifetime access to the recordings for the event. So you can either go back over it, or if you can't attend live because you're just too busy on the weekend, or you can only come to half it because you've got a kid's sport or something, you'll be able to listen to the part that you actually miss. I'll be covering, like, the starting of the day by teaching about the foundational asset protection principle. Stephen will then be coming in teaching about family offices, the way that the offshore world and open people up to the world outside Australia, what's really going on, America, Europe, and everywhere, and how they're protecting their wealth, the structures, the family offices, the jurisdictions they're using. Virgil's going to be speaking as a high net worth advisor for Singapore with gold, where a lot of Europeans invest with their company, and speaking about crypto lending and things like that. And then in the afternoon, I'll be talking about some of my favorite strategies, ranging to the kind of structures you use, how you do it, using second mortgages on properties, and even using what's called insolvency restructurings and that to get rid of debts. Okay, So watch your space for that. So thanks for coming today. So who's planning to come to this event? Who wasn't coming before but is planning to come now? Just so I've got an idea if there's anyone who's decided to come. Well, I can see almost everyone's coming, but I'm just curious. Oh, Sarah, great. And Elsbeta, awesome. So a couple more people. Electra, yep. Bernadette, yeah, look, Bernadette, you can watch the recording afterwards. So main thing is, just so you know, the price we're giving, we guarantee till the end of the event. We're going to be selling them for a lot more in future. It's $127 to attend live or have the recordings. The plan is we're going to be shortly combining this and the last couple of events and just doing a big product for $497, so to speak, which will be selling it. So for those of you who do this now, you'll get a better kind of deal. So Katie, yep, well, you can always come along. You can always pay for it and then basically, yeah, get access to recordings if you want to. That's the other option you've got. So Lenny's still got a book in. That's awesome. Okay, everyone. Well, much appreciated, and thank you very much for coming. Hope you got some good value today. Who enjoyed today? Nadine, brilliant. Thanks. See you Saturday. Yeah, thanks, Nadine. Always sweet. Wonderful. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Jeanette. Thanks, Tanya. Thanks, Neville. Thanks, Aid. Thanks, everyone. So wonderful. You're great. You're a really great group, and really look forward to speaking on Saturday and being ready for a big weekend, or big day rather. So see you then, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your night.
To kick the habit that my mind is breathing.